Hey, Pgov, welcome in. It's been a while since we did one of these Your Weekly addresses, so it's good to be back in business. And tonight I want to talk about a short topic here to augment your understanding of the presidential roles and the presidential powers that we've been steamrolling through. And we used a really interesting current event earlier in the year to get into presidential vetoes. But I want to clarify things a little deeper than we've gone already this year. Now, keep in mind, we still have a lot to discuss about the lawmaking process, and we'll be doing that shortly here before the winter break when we focus on the legislative branch. But within the presidential powers outlined in the Constitution is the ability to veto a bill that's passed in Congress. The president has this power as a form of a check and balance for the executive branch against the legislative branch. Now, the veto has been utilized by multiple presidents over multiple years, and I've got some really interesting statistics here to share with you. And, the first thing I want to point out is, which president has used the most number of vetoes? And the answer is kind of obvious because he was president over the course of four terms, almost four terms, because he died while in his last term. But that's Franklin Roosevelt, FDR. FDR, ready for this statistic? FDR issued 635 vetoes. Yeah, you heard that right, 635. That's just an astonishing number of vetoes. To put it in perspective, Barack Obama has issued about 12, and George W. Bush issued 12 during his presidency previous. So the numbers are just absolutely startling for FDR. But to me, like the more impressive statistic, get a load of this. So FDR's 635 came over the course of almost four presidential terms, right? Well, how about Grover Cleveland? Now, Grover Cleveland has the distinction in American presidential history as being the only president to serve two non-consecutive terms. He was elected president, then he wasn't elected, then he decided not to run for a second term, but then he came back to win in 1892. So Grover Cleveland won in 1884 and then again in 1892. He's the only president in American history to do so. But Grover Cleveland, in his first term as president, vetoed 414 bills in Congress. 414. Now, that was in just a matter of 4 years. The numbers are just mind-boggling. So, yes, FDR has the most number of vetoes, but Grover Cleveland, by far, in terms of the lifespan of one presidential term, and I don't know if we'll ever see anything like it. Now, I guess maybe Cleveland was tired of vetoing bills the second term. He only vetoed 170 the next term. But not only is Cleveland's 414 a pretty astonishingly high number, he also had a 99.3% success rate in his vetoes. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, we already covered earlier this year that even though a president may veto a bill, Congress can override the bill by reintroducing it to a 2/3 majority in the House and Senate. So if the president shuts down the bill, it's only temporary. It goes back to Congress, and Congress then in each house votes. And if each house overrides the veto 2/3 majority, then it doesn't matter if the president vetoed the bill or not. The example of that is the current event, and the only time this has happened in Barack Obama's presidencies was the 9/11 bill earlier this year, in which Congress passed a law granting Americans, families of the families of victims from 9/11 to sue the Saudi Arabian government. We talked about that earlier. Obama vetoed the bill, but then Congress overrode Obama's veto earlier this year, right around election time, actually. And that was the only time Barack Obama's veto was overridden. The override process is it's not always a guarantee. A lot of times, and we'll get into this more when we talk about Congress, there's a lot of painstaking work that needs to be done, and there's a lot of maneuvering and political, fire that goes on. But back to Grover Cleveland. So out of those 414 vetoes, 99.3% of those vetoes sustained. meaning that Congress wasn't able to override his veto. So Cleveland boasts one of the highest percentages of vetoes of all time. FDR, we already mentioned him with his 635. FDR's success rate was 97.6. Some presidents, like John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, can boast a 100% veto rate. Obama's was 91.7. Some of the lower veto, and again, I don't need you to memorize all this. I'm just kind of nerding out a little bit on you. George W. Bush has the lowest success rate. 4 of Bush's 12 vetoes were overridden, so about 66% their success rate. Ronald Reagan had a low success rate, 76% for Reagan. Nixon around 73. So I can send you guys a link if you want to check all this stuff out. It's pretty interesting. So yeah, how about that? Grover Cleveland, popping up a lot here in your weekly address. Now, the standard veto is the one that's most commonly used. The veto that's less commonly used is the all sort of confusing a little bit pocket veto. Now, the idea of a pocket veto is actually outlined quite nicely in the Constitution. And the framers of the Constitution actually borrowed the concept of the pocket veto from the great state of New York. This concept was embedded in New York state constitution. And the framers kind of modeled the American Constitution's system for a pocket veto. Now, the idea behind a pocket veto is really that what happens if the president, because actually, let me back up here. So this is actually from Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution. So it's under the legislative branch. If any bill shall not be returned by the president within 10 days, Sundays accepted, after it shall be presented to him, the same shall be a law. So what's that mean? That means that if the president, once the president has a bill from Congress, the president has 10 days to act. He must have 10 days to make a decision. Do I sign the bill into a law or do I veto it? Now, if you think about it, that actually presents quite a conundrum, because if you're president and you don't want a bill to go through, well, just don't sign the darn thing, right? Just let it sit there. After 10 days, it just won't become a law. Well, see, Congress, that would obviously impede a lot of their progress. So the framers were quite savvy, and James Madison and others who were formulating the Constitution saw through the potential disaster that could create. So the framers created a system which they didn't call it this in the Constitution. It's not actually called a pocket veto in the Constitution. The name pocket veto was coined by Andrew Jackson. But the idea of the pocket veto is that the president must act within 10 days. Okay, that's standard business. Now, the other part of Article 1, Section 7 says that unless the Congress, by their adjournment, prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law. There's the power of the president. And what that means is if that bill has not been signed by the time that Congress adjourns, which is like a break, then the president can kill the bill. That's the idea of the pocket veto. And again, the idea is like you can tuck the bill into your pocket and it just kind of goes away. So a president has 10 days to act. But within those 10 days, if Congress happens to take a break, an adjournment, then there you go. The president can actually pocket veto the bill. Pocket vetoes don't happen very often. In fact, Obama had no pocket vetoes. Bush had one. Clinton had one. Reagan used a great deal of pocket vetoes. 39 of his 78 vetoes were pocket vetoes. Eisenhower used 108 out of 181 pocket vetoes. FDR, of course, has the most. Again, that just makes sense because of the fact that he served for so long. But here you go. Here's Grover Cleveland again. 110 pocket vetoes in his first term and 128 pocket vetoes in his second term. So, you probably got more Grover Cleveland in your life here on this Sunday than you ever thought you would. We should just, again, be very aware of the power of the pocket veto, because it is a provision that the president can utilize it can kill a bill without actually having to veto the bill. So the question of pocket vetoes, by the way, has been interpreted by the Supreme Court. There were a few cases in the 1920s dealing with Native Americans that were suing the federal government to reclaim reparations for lost land that the government had seized earlier in American history. This was during Calvin Coolidge's presidency, and a group of native tribes sued the government over lost land. And Congress was actually in the process of passing a bill that would give the natives their land, the money back. So Congress passes a bill that says we'll give the natives the money. Coolidge used a pocket veto to kill the bill. The Native Americans sued over the fact that Coolidge had killed the bill. And the Supreme Court in this case, they're known as the pocket veto case from 1929. Coolidge uses a pocket veto to kill the bill that would give money to the Native Americans. The Native American tribes sue, and the Supreme Court upheld the power of the pocket veto. So as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, the pocket veto is constitutional, and so it's here to stay. But it's not used as often. Always be aware of this veto power, and as we move forward with legislative powers, it's going to become more clear when, in some famous cases we can talk about. Maybe one of the more famous ones is just, what happened in your lifetime. The Obama veto, which was overridden. But others that come to mind off memory for me, George Bush tried to veto Congress and was successful. Vetoed Congress over a law to withdraw troops in Iraq. That was vetoed in 2007. Nixon vetoed some important environmental laws back in the 1970s. Reagan tried to veto some abortion bills that were passed. So, you can look these things up. But the idea here is that vetoes are a common occurrence depending on the president. And that dynamic between the president and Congress is often, earmarked by how contentious the eras are. And so, you look at Obama, he only issued 12 vetoes. And the only one that was overturned was the 9/11. So it all just depends on the dynamic. And usually if a president, here's what I'll leave you with, very important. If a president tends to have the same party in power, then you would assume the president wouldn't issue as many vetoes, and that's important to think about with now the Republicans having the majority in the House and the Senate and the White House. So we'll have to keep an eye on the veto process here throughout Mr. Trump's presidency. But for now, that's it. Hopefully this enlightens you guys a little bit on the presidential powers when it comes to the veto. We got the reading quiz on Tuesday on the reading, so we'll be getting deeper and deeper into the presidential powers, and we should have that all wrapped up by Wednesday at the latest. So hope everyone has a good rest of your day here on Sunday afternoon. Take care here from the Smith household. Remember, the past shapes the future. Have a nice afternoon.